Hosting for With the First Link on the Trek Geeks Podcast Network is brought to you by Fansets, creators of cool pins and memorabilia from your favorite franchises. Visit fansets.com and use code TrekGeeks, all capital letters, for your exclusive 10% discount.
Hello, and welcome to With the First Link, the podcast that hopes to make our future as bright and as just as the one that we see in Star Trek: The Next Generation. And we think that one way to do that is to recap and discuss the entire series, one episode at a time, doing our best to look at it all through an anti-oppression, pro-diversity, anti-racist lens. I'm Ruthie Czamosi.
And I'm Matthew Simone, and today we'll be talking about Up the Long Ladder. This episode was written by Melinda M. Snodgrass and directed by Winrich Colby. It first aired on May 20th, 1989.
Before we get into our check-in, we have a special guest today. My wonderful sister / resident science expert, Jake, also scientist, I guess. Jake Szamosi is joining us. Hi, Jake.
Hello.
How are you?
I am thrilled to be here.
I'm excited you're here too. I'm excited that we get real science cred this way whenever you're here. So thank you.
Yeah,
I like science. How whenever there's a biology question on Star Trek, I get to be on the podcast. I enjoy that.
Nice.
Yes. You all may recall Jake from from Unnatural Selection, which featured an interview with Jake. So yeah. We're happy to have you here to answer all our questions about cloning and how that works.
I'll do my best.
You're that kind of scientist, right? You clone people, I think.
No, I don't clone people. It is not legal in Canada to clone people.
Oh, okay.
Neither is it in the Federation. I was thinking so there are a few science advisors for Star Trek, and one of them is Mohammed Noor, who is just biology. So it is interesting that out of the two, like one of them is a physicist, like an astrophysicist, and the other one is just biology. So I think it makes sense that we have our own biologist who comes on the show when we need science help as well.
There we go. Exactly. Okay, let's get into the check-in topic. So for today's check-in, here's the question. If you were going on a long trip to a new world, so like a permanent trip, and let's say for the sake of this scenario that like your material needs would be taken care of. So you're going to be fed, you're going to have clothes that fit, all of that is taken care of. What kinds of things would you pack?
Apparently I should pack more clones of myself.
Yeah, well, yes, that's apparently how it works.
Am I allowed to pack my friends? I feel like I would be lonely and I would want to bring my people or at least a means of communicating with them.
Like a space phone.
Yeah.
Or like a space internet connection.
A subspace communicator situation.
All right, that makes sense.
I think it makes sense to me too, because like most of the time, this is why I only ever own laptops. I haven't owned a desktop since I moved out of my parents' house. And it's because that is my whole connection to the world is on that computer. I can bring it around with me, but I can also create things with it and like do stuff with it. So that's basically anytime I ever go anywhere, it's kind of like me and my laptop in a backpack.
So no spinning wheels, neither of you?
I mean, am I going to have more space on this new planet than I currently have in my apartment? Because if so, I would probably bring a spinning wheel.
All right, that's fair. See, my mind, every time I tried to think of things I would bring, I kept just coming back to like, I'd probably want to bring my cat. So that would be my main thing. I'd bring my cat food, some cat toys.
What's a spinning wheel?
Data goes on a whole explanation.
Yeah, Data explains it to us.
It's what Sleeping Beauty pricks her finger on. That's what I.
Okay, but
you mean from the episode? I see.
A spinning wheel is a device from like pre-industrial times to spin wool into yarn.
Oh, right, of course. Yeah, that's the one he's talking over Picard while Picard's trying to like figure out something on the computer.
Yes.
And I was paying attention to what he was trying to say rather than what Data was trying to say, which is funny because that's what he was trying to do as well.
I'd just like to say this was a bit of a you can see the difference between Jake and me. that, first of all, Jake gave an actual explanation of what a spinning wheel is, and I said it's the thing Sleeping Beauty puts her finger on. And then right before Jake said it was from pre-industrial times, I was about to say olden times.
That's right, oldie times.
Olden times. I mean, I can't get more specific than that, and I'm sure that it persisted into industrial times. I don't know. I would not want to be fact-checked by a historian on that.
I bring a camera because I tend to document adventures, as you know.
That's nice.
And so I bring my camera along as well, and I want to take photos of things. I really actually I've got a whole stack of photos from northern British Columbia that I still need to go through. That was the last time I was on the road for an extended period of time, and they were beautiful. The landscape was amazing.
I know Ruthie said that our material needs would be taken care of, but I would stock up on high quality sports bras.
Yeah, I would make sure I had like comfortable clothes. That's for sure.
We're talking like this is like an interstellar journey though as well.
Yeah.
Oh, can I bring my plants? Like all my house plants? I might want to bring my house plants.
Just like pass by stars and be like, get a little bit of sunlight. Get a little bit of sunlight.
There has to be some light on the ship because
I imagine
otherwise I would wither and die. So, and then wherever we're going, there will be a sun.
Yes.
Presumably, yes. It's living on some like rogue asteroid. Pull over. This is only the closest stop for the next 20 light years.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right, everybody, take your bathroom break, and we're off.
Thanks, lone asteroid.
All right, should we get into the episode?
In this episode, an antiquated distress signal leads to 2 lost 22nd century Earth colonies, each facing doom in different ways, one by fire, the other by prolonged cloning.
Prolonged cloning. I hate when that happens. It says
here in the notes, it says discuss episode. Let's discuss.
Let's discuss. So we start on the bridge, and it's a really weird opening that has absolutely nothing to do with the rest of the episode, but I honestly think it's my favorite part of the episode.
This is a pattern. This is what I've been telling you. There's so many of these episodes where this prolongs into later seasons where like it's not even, it's like a C plot and it's the main opening and you don't really get into the main story until like after the commercial break, or even like in this case, kind of halfway through the episode. But anyway.
I don't know what we can call this, like an A plot, B plot, C plot episode. Like, I think we need to use the word plot really loosely here.
Yeah.
Well, the thing about this that is so funny to me is that we could almost even call this the A plot. The A plot and the B plot happen sequentially, not concurrently. Like his business with Worf is fully resolved before the next thing happens.
Yeah, it's one thing and then the other thing.
That's right. Yeah.
So basically, Worf faints. Like some other stuff is happening while he's fainting. So Picard asks Riker to come into the ready room, and they listen to this signal. And Riker's like, "Oh, that's an SOS." That he was able to figure this out in like 2 seconds. Apparently, it took Starbase research hours to figure it out.
Before we get into the conversation between Picard and Riker, or Worf thing, I just want to say I really love this little bit of business where Picard asks Riker to join him in the ready room, and Riker points at Data before he goes into the ready room, and then Data goes to the command chair. They do that a lot, and it just adds a little verisimilitude, and it just is so like, it just looks like a well-run organization, right? Like they don't need a lot of verbal communication. Data knows what's expected of him. Riker knows how to communicate it. It happens really efficiently. And I think in later seasons, there's less of that pointing and it just happens.
Yeah.
Which is almost, again, like they've been working together for longer now. So then they don't need that signaling. But here they've only been working together a couple of years, so they use it. I really, really like, I love when they do that. It's one of my favorite little things.
I don't know, there's also a piece of it that like it's friendly.
Yeah.
Like it shows a certain level of like trust and camaraderie as opposed to having to say, okay, Data, you're on duty now.
No, I just found it really charming. So I wanted to mention it before we race into this Riker is smarter than all of Starfleet research.
I thought I knew the meaning of this, but I totally, as you were talking, definitely Googled verisimilitude just to make sure.
And were you right?
No, I wasn't, but I'm glad now I've learned. So thank you. So the computer says the signal was used by the European hegemony. I said hegemony.
I said hegemony.
I say hegemony as well.
Hegemony.
I've never heard it with the hard G.
Yeah.
They both did it though.
Yeah. I thought at first it was like a, I don't know, British thing. So Patrick Stewart said it that way, but then Riker did too. Basically, it's a 22nd century alliance, which sounds kind of like the European Union, which happened well before the 22nd century, but it was part of the first stirrings of world government. And so there are some lost ships that are not accounted for in in any of the Federation's records that went from Earth, and they are now in the Ficus sector, and they're in trouble. They're sending out an SOS.
This would actually predate the formation of the EU in real life as well.
This episode did, yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I was wondering why the European hegemony was, like, why they didn't mention the EU or the UN as the precursor to world government. But if the EU didn't exist yet, that does explain
that's
it.
why.
I think the talkings of it probably would have been around this time. So maybe that's why. It's kind of maybe a nod to like current day events that were going on.
Maybe.
Yeah. So the computer can't find any ships that are launched from Earth during that time, during the for that destination near the Ficus sector. So back on the bridge, Picard and Riker enter and find several crew members around Worf, who's just lying on the floor.
He has fainted, and Data's like, yeah, he just collapsed, and he calls Dr. Pulaski to the bridge, and now we are into the credits, and we get a captain's log that they are on their way to investigate this mysterious signal, and Worf is in sickbay.
Worf is just like, I didn't faint.
No,
you're not allowed to use that word.
Klingons do not faint.
But I kind of like that Pulaski, part of the reason that she's worried is that Worf is right. Klingons don't faint. So this must be something serious.
So for our resident biologist, what happened? What happened instead?
I mean, he fainted is what happened.
Oh, okay. I thought he suffered a dramatic drop in blood pressure because his blood glucose level dropped and there was deficient blood flow resulting from circulatory failure. In other words, he called up his toes and lay unconscious on the floor.
Yes, that's just...
She's a little condescending and like patronizing about that, but it's true. That seems to be what happened.
Yeah, I mean, Worf a little bit deserves it. I don't know. I like Pulaski in this moment.
Yeah.
She's great in this whole episode.
She is, yeah. I like her in this episode. It turns out that Worf has what is called rapach ingor, which is a Klingon childhood ailment. So Worf is all embarrassed, and he asks how Riker would feel if he got the measles.
So there are three things. So there are two things I want to say about that.
Please.
One is, why would it be embarrassing to get the measles? I don't really understand why that's
I'd be angry if I got the measles because it means that people aren't vaccinating against measles.
Someone wasn't vaccinated. The other thing about this, and this is like a little bit deep in the weeds of the biology and epidemiology of it, and you may not want to keep this in the episode, but most childhood illnesses, at least here on Earth now, are infectious diseases, right? Things like measles, mumps, rubella, chickenpox. They're infectious diseases that give lasting immunity. So you get them once and then you're immune to them and then you don't get them again. You don't get them because you're a child. You get them within the first few years of being in a population where you're exposed to them. So if you don't have them as a child and then you go somewhere, you'll get them as an adult. My question is, who did Worf get this Rapach Ingor from? Like, why is he getting... Where's the other Klingon that gave it to... What, is there a Klingon child running around who has it, who gave it to him? Right? Like, childhood illnesses are not...
You don't just develop them on their own.
Maybe got them from one of those Klingons in like the previous season and it has like a long incubation period.
Could be. And if it's not an infectious disease, if there are other things that like tend to arise in childhood, then if those things arise unusually in an adult, that would make you want to like do more testing. Like there's something physiologically going on with this adult that you want to know about. So anyway, I just object to the fact that they're like, oh, it's a childhood disease. We're not worried about it.
Yeah, and measles even wasn't that common at this time the show was written. So I felt like maybe they were trying to go more for like chicken pox, and that was probably what was in the script. But then the makeup people were like, well, then we have to figure out what Klingon chicken pox looks like. So just write it in as measles, and then that's what they did.
And make him faint.
Yeah. Do people faint from measles?
I don't actually know what the symptoms of measles are.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't know because we've been vaccinated and we're not supposed to get that anymore.
We're supposed to get that anyway. But the important part here is that Picard calls down to the sickbay, and in an unusual moment of confidentiality that we do not usually see in Star Trek med bays, Pulaski covers for him and says that he was doing a Klingon ritual involving fasting, just forgot to like decrease his physical activity, and Worf really appreciates her discretion.
And she like crosses her fingers while she's saying it, like, "Oh, I feel so bad about lying," instead of like doctor-patient confidentiality is a thing.
That's a good point.
There is none of that here. Like, it's there. She keeps it confidential, but she doesn't say, "I can't tell you that he's my patient." She just fully lies.
Yeah, this is the first time I've ever tried to do this. Fingers crossed.
Yeah. So then we go to the ready room. Again, this like makes no sense to me. So there's no record of any ship leaving for the Ficus sector, but he's like, but there would still be a manifest. But where are they?
This makes no sense.
I don't the manifest would be a record.
Where is the manifest stored
that they don't also have the record? I don't know.
What does that mean? Like, unless there's like vendors of that era, like the people who sold them the various computers and spinning wheels and whatever, but it just doesn't make any sense. Like, the manifest should be stored with the record of the ship leaving. That's where the manifest is.
The important thing is it leads to Picard finding the SS Mariposa, which then brings us the following exchange.
I love it so much.
Mariposa, the Spanish word for butterfly.
Thank you, Data.
I thought it might be significant, sir.
It doesn't appear to be, Data.
No, sir.
It's so funny.
So funny. I love it. There are so many things in this episode that you think are going to be significant, and they're just not. Like Worf fainting. This is not significant to the episode at all.
So Picard starts reading the manifest, which includes a mix of this like newer technology, computers and satellites, and then older technology like spinning wheels and farm animals. And Data starts defining a spinning wheel, which clearly I wasn't paying attention to, as it's access from his eternal dictionary, I guess, while Picard
I guess so, yeah.
He just like has a database of things that he's not consciously aware of, so he has to like go pull them out when
I love that. I love that so much, yeah.
But I really like the way he's just like talking to himself about what a spinning wheel is.
Yeah.
It's like, can we focus up here, buddy?
It's so funny. So Data kind of speculates that they might have been planning for the worst. And he mentions this Liam Deegan, who is the founder of the Neo-Transcendentalists, who advocated for a return to simpler times, living in harmony with nature. I feel like this is something that comes up a few times in Star Trek, like this idea of technology is actually the source of all of our problems, and we should go back
and also this, like, it says Picard wonders why they had computers, and it's also interesting to me that there's this like contrastingness of, if you're going to live in harmony with nature, you can't have computers,
right? And if you're going to use computers, you can't use a spinning wheel as well,
right? Instead of like being able to be selective about the technology that you use and mindful about its impacts on nature without rejecting it wholesale.
Yeah, there's no like in between. It's like it's not really thought out super well. And later, I mean, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves here, but also like they don't know what computers are when we finally meet them, which is weird because they would have had to have, I guess, consciously rejected that technology. So it's not like they wouldn't know. Maybe after all this time, they don't know.
I understood that as like descending from this neo-transcendentalist or whatever thing of like, they started a colony where they wouldn't have computers, so they're like 10
none of their kids
generations
learned
in
about
at this point.
Yeah. Anyway, we get to my favorite scene where we're in sickbay and Worf brings this tray with 2 cups and flowers, and he is performing the Klingon tea ceremony to thank Pulaski for keeping his embarrassing secret of having Rapach Ngor. And Pulaski's so honored, and she knows about the ceremony, but she's not a Klingon, and she has never learned about its mysteries.
The tea is a test of bravery among Klingons because it's really bad for them, and it will kill her. So I
love that.
It's like such a great gesture because he's like, I want to do this with you, but I'm the only one who's going to drink the tea because if you do it, you'll die. But he still brings it out anyway, which is quite nice.
I think it is. And I like also what he says, that he says, though this tea being really bad for them, drinking it together, it's a reminder that death is an experience best shared, like the tea.
Yeah. Right.
And then Pulaski says that she didn't realize Worf was a romantic.
Yeah, he is a romantic.
Is,
I like this depiction of him, that he's not just this like macho security guy. He is that, but he is also, and he says that it is among the Klingons that love poetry achieves its fullest flower. And we learn later, like, he loves Klingon opera. You know, he's just a well-rounded guy.
I do want to just mention, and I do love this scene. I think it's a very sweet scene. It does a little bit smack of Orientalism, right? It alludes to, you know, Japanese tea ceremonies or whatever, without presumably, you know,
like
really engaging with that source material.
Yeah, that is a good point. It is for sure. There is exoticizing of these like tea ceremonies that are actually things that happen on Earth as well.
This is a really nice gesture here where Pulaski's like, wait, I can participate in the tear ceremony. So she's like, she walks out off scene and then comes back, and she has this hypo spray and she injects herself, and it's an antidote. So she could actually consume the tea without dying. So they're able to drink it together. And then Pulaski tells Worf, quote me some of that love poetry.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Yeah. And then they cut away before he does, which makes me very sad.
Yeah, that could have just been the rest of the episode. I would have been totally cool with that. It's just, he just starts going on about poetry for like 30 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, instead we have to arrive at the Ficus sector, where Data says that the system's sun is having a lot of flare activity. And apparently there was like a deleted scene at one point where we find out that there are satellites that the, I don't know, progenitors of this colony installed satellites to for safety reasons, and that's what triggered the SOS that got sent out, is this solar flare activity.
We see like a flary sun in the distance.
It's a very cool visual.
Yeah.
I like the visual.
That's happening to our sun right now.
It is.
Yeah, we have this big giant super flare thing going on in our sun, and there's been like, I've been seeing people post cool like northern light videos from all over the world.
Yeah, apparently I saw some people post a picture of the northern lights from like just outside Guelph, Ontario.
Amazing.
Which,
yeah, like where you can't usually see them.
Yeah, our non-Southern Ontario listeners is like not very far north at all.
No, I was trying to make a joke, but it's not working. Never mind. I was like, what's the like middle to northern lights? Sorry. Didn't work.
It's like equatorial
lights.
Equatorial lights, yeah. No, it's
Northern
coming. It goes
lights.
more southerly. I've been looking out for them here, but it's been so cloudy in Vancouver that we haven't really had a big opportunity. But yeah. Anyways, so yes, there's big flares going on. The system sun is having flare activity, and they find this Class M planet. They detect life forms below the surface, but get no response to their hails.
Yeah, it turns out
this was confusing to me. It says they're 30 meters below the surface, and I was like, do they live there? Is that just where why are they below? Like,
I thought they went there to escape the solar flares.
But how do they know about the solar flares? Like, they don't have computers.
Maybe they can see all these northern lights, and they're like, "What is that?" And so they dug really deep. Who knows?
They never mention it.
Nothing in this episode is fully explained. Like nothing. They bring up so many things, and then they're like, "Just so you know, that's how it is." Will we elaborate? No.
Yeah. So anyway, they're in caverns for some reason.
To escape the flares, presumably.
But
they can't. The Enterprise can't communicate with them because the planet seems to have no artificial power source, so no communication system. And they're like, okay, well, we need to evacuate this planet because of these flares. And Troy is like, okay, but we can't just like beam them up because they've been isolated for 30 years. If they get beamed up onto a starship, that's going to scare them.
300 years.
300 years.
Did I say 3 years?
You said 30.
30 years.
But we have all the variations of that number now. So there we go.
Yeah, it's an order of magnitude wrong. But yes, 300 years. So you can't just beam people off a planet because That's called alien abduction, it turns out.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that. Well, technically not. They're other humans, so it wouldn't be alien abduction.
It's just kidnapping.
Just kidnapping.
Just kidnapping. So Riker beams down to prepare them for evacuations, and then he comes up over the comms and says that there's roughly 200 people on the planet. They're willing to leave, but there is a problem. And Picard is just like, I don't want to hear about it. Like, let's just get them on board.
This part only exists to set up the joke of Picard hearing the farm animals.
That is exactly what that is. Yeah,
that's the only reason. Picard is never like, no, Riker, give me less information.
O'Brien, ironically, as the Irish crew member, beams them on board, and it includes about 7 people. Here's the thing, why did all the hay beam up with all of them? Do we need that? I mean, that's obviously just also trying to set up the joke.
Yeah.
For the aesthetic.
That's all it was.
And Ruthie, you did some digging here about how Cole Meany actually felt about this episode.
Yeah, apparently he wasn't happy with it.
Surprise.
Not
shockingly.
Yeah. And also I looked up the two people who we hear speak with Irish accents. From what I could tell, neither of them is Irish. They're both English.
Yeah, that's no surprise.
So there is an episode in Deep Space Nine where there was supposed to be a leprechaun character.
Oh my God.
And they switched it to Rumpelstiltskin because Cole Meany was like, no, we're not going to have a leprechaun in this show. He couldn't really, at this point in this show, he was a relatively minor character. He didn't have much sway, I doubt. I don't think. So he couldn't really do anything about it, but he was like, no, please do not depict my people this way.
Yeah.
I mean, you could hardly blame him for being upset. This dude's an absolute caricature.
For sure. I also like how these people seem to come with their own theme music, because when we hear over the comms to the bridge, all the noises, the music is also playing, and it really sounds like Picard can hear that music over the communicator.
I really do enjoy how every time we see them, it's like fiddles and concertina in the background.
That's so stereotypical.
It is.
But it's, I don't know, I just love traditional Irish music. So I personally am like, yay.
You just like hearing the music.
I just like the music. That might be actually contributing. We discussed, before we started recording, I think, we discussed how, despite the fact that this episode is really objectively not very good on any measure, it is one of my favorites. I love it. It makes me very happy. And I wonder if just the fiddles are part of it, because I just love fiddles.
Yeah. Jake loves farm animals and fiddles and chaos, sort of generally.
Especially on the Enterprise. I love when the Enterprise is such a tightly run ship, and I love when there's just a bit of chaos.
So O'Brien's like, okay, Picard, you're gonna have to come to the transporter room. So Picard and Worf they approach the transporter room, and a chicken flies out the door, followed by a very adorable small child taking this chicken.
Just all toothy grinned.
A lovely bit of comedy there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, there is the guy who plays this, we find out his name is Danilo O'Dell. He absolutely is a caricature, not disputing that in the slightest. He's very good at facial expressions and sounds and voices. It's not a great thing that he's doing, but he is doing it well.
Yeah,
I would say.
Agree.
Danilo O'Dell is at first ready to tell Picard off, because he's like, oh, you're just making decisions for me and my people without checking in with us. And then he notices Worf, and he's like, oh, I don't suppose security is much of a problem for you.
Danilo's right, and that is a theme that goes through this whole episode. It's really decisions being made for entire societies without really their consent. But
absolutely, yeah. It's totally, it's very it's not well. Nothing in this episode feels well thought out, or no, it's frustrating.
Yeah.
But they couldn't leave their animals to die, which is true. I wouldn't want to leave my animals to die either.
Exactly. Yeah, of course. So Picard is like, okay, take all of this and beam everyone to cargo hold 7.
How many cargo holds can there be on the Enterprise?
Big ship, Matthew.
Apparently the big ship. I'll have to refer back to the technical manual.
I was under the impression that you were the one with the specs and diagrams.
Yeah, usually I am, but I'm pretty sure there isn't a cargo hold 7. I have to go back and check.
Maybe there's cargo hold 7, but not all of 1 to 6.
Yeah, maybe not. I think this might be before the technical manual was published, and so some of these internal details of the Enterprise may have not been like solidified yet.
Yeah. We also find out, as Picard and Worf are trying to leave, we find out that Danilo O'Dell has a daughter who is going to come up. He wants Picard to consider marrying her. That's not going to happen. But, you know, we find out he has a daughter.
Worf has to intimidate him to get him to go away. He's like, no.
Yeah. So we go to the observation lounge. The total is 223 people, but we've got 2 more who are going to be born soon. And they're talking about they're going to head to the nearest starbase, but then we hear an alarm going off, and they realize it is these people because there's a fire in cargo hold 7, and these people are called the Bringloidi, which is apparently the Irish word for dreams.
So I didn't know that.
I don't know, that's kind of nice. Yeah. I was curious what you two thought of this fire suppression system, which is that basically the computer detects a fire and a force field and just like opens a force field over it.
Yes, and that it's talked about in this episode, and that is one thing that is mentioned in the Star Trek technical manual, but the system seems to work only with respect to dramatic context.
I mean, like if it's plot necessary to like have a fire, it doesn't work.
Because there are many times where there's lots of fire on starships in Star Trek, and that system doesn't seem to work. So it will snuff out people trying to make a distillery, but if there's like actual plasma fire or whatever, nothing.
Smothering is a legitimate, currently used fire suppression technique, right? I mean, it's how even just like a regular fire extinguisher works, but also in big rooms, like in a lot of museum warehouses or whatever, where, you know, they have stuff that's extremely valuable and extremely prone to fire damage or susceptible to fire damage. The fire suppression systems basically are big pumps that clear all the air out of the room inside of 30 seconds. And if you don't get out of the room when those doors start coming down, you will suffocate and die.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
That feels really dangerous. Like, I was thinking about this. What if one of these poor children had like stumbled into the fire right at the moment that the force field had come down, right? Wouldn't that child then die? Yeah,
well, that's what Worf suggests too.
Yeah.
It's one of those rare situations where like the Enterprise is actually acting like a spaceship. Like when you're in space, fire is such an emergency that it is okay to just let the person in the room with the fire die. Like you will lose the whole ship if you don't. And this comes up in all sorts of sci-fi, like this comes up in The Expanse, in Battlestar Galactica, all sorts of situations where, for dramatic effect, right, someone has to be sacrificed because the fire has to be contained.
Yeah, that's like the opening of BSG. They vent a whole bunch of people directly into
space.
space.
Yeah.
Yep.
That would have been a short episode in this case.
The only thing about it that surprises me is that Star Trek did it, because Star Trek doesn't usually like bow to the realities of space travel in that way.
That's right. Artificial gravity.
Like if we're talking about these fire suppression systems in museums, how long is the air not in the room for? Like you can survive for a little while without air.
I don't know.
They sometimes also pump like different gases, like into the room. That's like that, what is it called? A halon system or something, but they'll pump like a fire suppressing gas into the room.
Like a non-flammable gas.
Like replace the oxygen. Yeah.
Right.
So the point is there's no oxygen, right? That's what is dangerous for the person, but also puts the fire out.
Yes.
I mean, if there's a child, like if it's a small fire and it's a small area, then maybe the fire goes out before the child suffocates. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, luckily we didn't find out this time. And yeah, you're right, Matt. Like in all the episodes that I've seen where there's a child near a fire, the fire suppression system seems to.
Yeah, like Alexander. He's like literally in a burning classroom. And they don't turn off the gravity or suck the air out of the room. 2 things they could have done to get him out from underneath like a piece of metal that is burning. And you're like, okay.
Back to this episode, which I mean has its own problems. So we meet now Danilo O'Dell's daughter, Brenna, and she is so angry. I love how angry she is at just everything in this episode. Like I get it. She has been just moved from her planet onto this other ship. She tries to cook food. The fire just goes out. Like,
she's
like,
looking at all the
"Come on."
practical elements here that need to get done and happen. And she makes several comments about the fact that like men will make all these decisions, but women are the ones that have to actually make it all work properly.
Yeah, and she's not like, I think she's totally right.
Especially in the context of this episode.
Well, yeah,
it's
for
a
sure.
lot of men making decisions around tables. Yes.
Yeah, and also like
Yep.
she says, you haven't offered us anything to eat. Like, come on, Captain. 223 people have just come onto your ship, and you're not gonna like show them how to use the replicators.
That is surprising to me, honestly. Like that doesn't seem like
No, that's not how
every
they act.
Every other time they bring people on the ship, the first thing they do is show them how the replicator works.
Yeah,
That's true.
yeah.
Yeah.
This
But they're
time
like
they're like-
diplomats and fancy and stuff.
I guess. I just want to make a comment about her outfit, partly because I sometimes like talking about wardrobe in Star Trek, but also because there's something really specific about this outfit. So she is wearing this like relatively tight, lacy red top that underneath you can, if you look closely, you can see a kind of greenish shirt. And then she's got a long flowing red skirt over several layers of green. And it is done in such a way that the shade of green, it doesn't like the way I feel like if you're a person who is familiar with Christmas, probably sounds very Christmassy. It's not, because it's a different shade of green. But anyway, that's what she's wearing. She's got a tight red top over a greenish top, and then this long red skirt over several layers of green skirts. Let's just put a pin in that for later.
It's a really nice outfit. I really like it.
Yeah, I like what she's.
What I
like
don't
what she's wearing.
like is Riker's facial expression when he encounters her.
Yeah.
Like every time there's a pretty lady, Riker's like, I have forgotten everything about everything other than how pretty this lady is.
He looks a little too excited. Yeah.
So it's just like, it's okay to let pretty women be people, Riker. Like, she's saying something, man.
Yeah.
I hate this thing about Riker that every time there's a pretty lady or anyone who might appear to be a pretty lady in his vicinity, he's like, I have one thought in my head, and it is how pretty this lady is.
And then all he has to do is stand there, and then her demeanor like entirely changes.
Yeah.
He just stands there looking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, listen, this is season 2 and I have a beard now, okay? This is how this works.
Beard does not excuse the facial expression. I'm sorry.
He does have a beard now, though. It is true.
It does.
It's true.
Yeah. So there is this short little exchange that apparently was not scripted. Apparently Patrick Stewart just started laughing. And so that part where he says you just have to bow to the absurd, apparently that was just him talking and they left it in.
It's like this show is never going to get renewed for a 3rd season.
Given, the quality of some of the episodes in the first 2 seasons, it is impressive they got a 3rd one.
Did he say that for a while he didn't even like unpack his stuff?
I think for the whole first season, Patrick Stewart kept all his stuff from England in a suitcase. Yeah. Picard and Worf leave the cargo hold. Riker's like, I'm going to stay behind to help. Picard's like, yeah, I bet you want to do that. Riker tells Brenna Odell, Danilo's daughter, that she doesn't have to clean because the ship is going to clean itself. And she's like, oh, well, good for the bloody ship then.
I really do enjoy this like moment of Star Trek has eliminated sexism by making computers do the cleaning.
I hadn't thought of it like that. Also, is she cleaning? It was hard to tell. She's kind of like moving hay around in circles.
I know. Yeah. Then, unfortunately, the music changes. Brenna asks Riker where she can wash her feet. And Riker says that as first officer, he feels that it's his responsibility to show her all of the amenities. I don't know why he wouldn't show everybody the showers, but
I wonder why.
This is the thing, right? Is that this exchange makes it clear that he knows exactly what she's talking about, because otherwise he would just be like, shower, here you go.
Yeah.
Right? He wouldn't bring her to his quarters as if there are no other showers on the ship.
Maybe there aren't. Maybe he's got the only one. I don't know. Possible.
Every morning, everyone just like lines up outside of Riker's quarters.
Yeah, it's like a lineup.
Yeah.
Worf and Picard leave Riker to do this. Worf comments that she is like a Klingon woman, by which I guess he means assertive. And then Danilo O'Dell, her dad, catches up with them and asks if they ever encountered the other colony. And
Other
Worf
colony?
Worf and Picard look at each other like, what?
Yeah. So then we get the captain's log. Picard is like, so now the other colony has the computers.
Right.
And this
explains the weird cargo.
Yes, they had computers and spinning wheels because they were two different groups.
I like how the writers sat down and they're like, how do we make a distinction between these two colonies? They're like, computers and I guess animals? Like, it's just...
And again, just really hilarious. The idea that you can't have both, right? That there's no...
Right, yeah.
There's no future where you can have spinning wheels and computers.
Nope.
As if we don't have them now.
You can pick one and stick with it. So then we enter Riker's quarters. And here is why I wanted to talk about the outfit. So Brenna is now she's taken off her red skirt and top. And she's just wearing green, but her top is like this crop top sweater. It's like a thick cable knit sweater.
It's so chunky. And it just like barely comes down to like the bra line.
Yeah. But like there's no way she was wearing that chunky sweater under this delicate, tight lace top. So that means before washing her feet, she got changed.
I love this chunky cable knit crop top. It is so good and weird. And I wish I had knit it.
Jake, I believe the way you described it before to me was, we have to make her hot, but also Irish.
Yeah.
Did I say that?
We'll show off her midriff, but with a cable knit sweater.
With cable knit sweater.
That's right, yeah. I could still go fishing if I wanted to. I'd still be warm enough.
She's like tidying up Riker's quarters, which is something that makes me stressed because the idea of someone just coming over to my house and starting to...
I think she's making a point. But then she also says that she still hasn't been shown where to wash her feet and lifts up her skirt slightly to illustrate. He's like, these are my feet.
Yeah.
And Riker just like literally points at the bathroom and he's like, there, go in there.
Yeah, he's still not. I was like, really? Have you not read the clues? Then it doesn't really make any sense, as you pointed out, Jake. At this point, like, why would he have directed her to his quarters already?
Yeah. So anyway, then she takes off her top skirt, and that's when Riker realizes that it's not actual foot washing.
She literally starts getting. She's in a stranger's quarters, and she literally starts getting undressed at him. And she doesn't like. So far, she doesn't know that he's interested. She thinks he's not interested. And she's like, what if I get naked? Maybe that will help.
And it does.
And it does, unfortunately.
This whole thing is frankly absurd. I want to put a pin in it for later, but I just want to put a pin in the like, she aggressively hits on Riker thing.
As a young person, now that I'm older, I think back on some of the things that I learned about how relationships and interpersonal relationships and romance work. From shows like this, and then I'm like, I wonder if any of the writers who wrote this stuff actually had any experience with real romance or interpersonal relationships themselves when they wrote this stuff.
Yeah, women just take off their skirt, right? When they're interested. That's how you know.
That's how you know. That's how you know.
And this is the writer on this episode is a woman, right?
Yes.
Yeah, Melinda Snodgrass.
You know, episodes get changed after they get written. I think actually. I think I read somewhere that this changed a lot from her original vision.
Yeah, because she also wrote Measure of a Man.
Yeah.
That's which is like,
it's a very different episode.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Anyway, so Danilo tells Worf that they're brewing. Was it poutine? Is that what it is?
Poutine, I think it's pronounced.
He pronounces it poutine, but the captions spell it Poteen. So
yes.
And they need to heat it, but of course the ship keeps putting out the fire. So this is a chance for Worf to bond with him over actual alcohol from the replicators, which there seems to go back and forth as to whether or not is actually available, because there's always maybe we haven't been. Have we been introduced to synthahol yet?
Well, he kind of mentions it here, but I don't know if we've found it before.
So one thing that I found really funny about this exchange is that Worf shows up, be like, you wanted something? and sees them, you know, they've put together this still, and he like looks the machine up and down and smiles to himself like he clearly knows what it is. He's like, I know what's happening here.
Yeah. They're talking my
Like
language.
Worf knows what a still is. And he's like, I can solve that problem for you without setting fire to anything.
At first, he just orders whiskey, and he's not happy with it. He says it has no bite, but then Worf orders him Chacha Tuluth. I probably said that wrong. Sorry,
Nice.
Klingons. My Klingon is not good. Which is apparently Klingon fire whiskey. You can like see the smoke coming out of his ears and like the fire coming out of his mouth. He calls it, what does he call it? Like a wee drop of the creature. He's a fan.
He's a fan. And Brent, of course, is not very happy about this, that he's drinking drunk because there's stuff that he needs to do.
Already drunk. Like he's had one sip. It has not had chance to like it's barely hit his stomach, let alone traverse into his blood system. And he's like already
That's
drunk.
the Klingon fire whiskey for
Fire
you.
whiskey. So Pulaski wants to send the children to school from the colony and have them integrate or mix with the Enterprise's children. Brenna thinks it's a good idea. So tells him to go. He's like, go. She's like, go handle this. And he kind of stumbles off.
I kind of like that because like these are descendants of the neo-transcendentalists, I think, but they're not, at this point, they're not like, no, we don't want to learn from anyone else. Like they seem very happy to learn from people who do use computers and don't live in harmony with nature.
Yeah, it's like that point earlier was just given, it was almost like a throwaway just to have a reason why they are in this state of existence, but they seem to have no connection to that philosophy anymore. It's like, no, we have to cook our own food. We don't believe in these food terminals. Like, don't help us with any of this stuff. We don't want to know your knowledge. They don't have any of that. It doesn't happen.
No, they're happy to like, cool. Yeah.
They're like, what? This machine gives me fire whiskey. I'm dead.
Well, if they had cared about that sort of stuff, if there had been resistance to using modern technology, then the episode would have had to be about something interesting and not about what it is about.
We're getting to the interesting part. We're just not there yet. We have to wait 2/3 into the episode.
I feel like interesting is a strong word.
First, we just have to hear Worf ask Brenna if she has ever considered a career in security, which I did like. Her response.
That's a much better way to hit on her than just stare with a creepy smile on your face.
Yeah, no, I think that's Worf. She and Worf, I think, could get along really well.
Yeah.
But she says, she's like, well, if it's anything like babysitting, I'm an authority. Okay, now we're at the new planet. We meet Wilson Granger. He's got like the most confused look on his face when Picard hails him.
Yeah, so he's the Prime Minister of Mariposa. This is one of those times, Ruthie, and you and I have talked about this a few times, where because of a plot of an episode, I tend to avoid the episode. But then as a result, there's like episodes that I remember watching, but I don't know where they are.
Yes.
And this is one of them. I'm like, oh, this is that clone episode. But I completely forgot that it's connected to this other episode, which I typically don't watch.
Totally. I was like, oh, this is the one with clones. I remember being like intrigued because I think this episode was the first time I'd ever in my life heard about clones.
It's also such like it's such a tonal shift. Like the contrast in tone from the first half to the second half of this episode is so all over the place.
We move really quickly from like comedic goats on the spaceship to okay, we're gonna talk some hardcore eugenics now, guys, and no one's gonna admit that's what we're doing.
Yeah, and abduct you and steal your genetic material.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, earlier we had chickens flying around in the hallway. Like, okay.
It's very, the tone, weird tonal shifts. So basically Picard is like, the only reason we haven't been in contact with you before is that you got lost in the bureaucracy. So, but we're here now and we want to renew ties.
We're 3 centuries late, but hey.
But we're here.
How's it
Imagine
going?
losing an entire colony in bureaucracy. That's gonna be some terrible record keeping.
Yeah, well, because apparently they only keep manifests.
Right.
Well, they did say that this was like right in the aftermath of World War III and the world was recovering and there was a lot of chaos.
That's fair.
That's fair.
Although that said, our father was born in 1945 in Eastern Europe, and
and
all the records of that still exist. Like
that is true.
So, well, I don't know. The world is
Anyway.
World War III might be a long war. So
Wilson invites them down, and before they go, so this is Wilson Granger. Troy urges caution. She's like, something's up with this colony. It's there's something sketchy going on here.
Yeah, and Riker probably remembers that in the last episode, he did not check with Troy before going down to a colony, so hopefully this time he remembers better. The Packlids.
Oh.
Last episode was the Packlids. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't listen to Troy, and in the last episode, Geordi ended up having the crap kicked out of him, so he's probably going to be a little bit more cautious.
Yes. So Riker, Pulaski, and Worf beam down, and they are greeted by Victor Granger, who is the Minister of Health, and he is identical to Wilson. And he says that their arrival is serendipitous, but he doesn't explain why. He keeps saying like, oh, I'll let the Prime Minister explain this. Worf and Riker kind of hang back as they're being led to the Prime Minister's office, and they wonder if maybe these two are twins. And then they pass by a room. They pass by a room and they see three identical women who are then joined by a fourth identical woman. And they're like, okay, there's something strange going on here.
Because you know what the casting call for this episode was like? They're like, are you triplets or quadruplets? Please come down to this recording studio.
Do you think, you don't think it was, I guess they're all standing right near each other. It can't have been shot with one actor.
Yeah, not for that one.
I didn't think about that.
With the one they might have had only 3 of that one actor and have the other woman, like have her just walk around or one of them walk around again. But yeah, I think some of them are actual triplets.
Oh, that makes sense.
There's a really weird scene. I don't know if you noticed this. There's like basically Pulaski is scanning this random guy while she is pretending to check out this like cool sculpture. But the way, again, like everything is so poorly thought out. They couldn't have this guy doing something. He's just standing there.
Like an NPC in a video game. He's just like literally staring into the middle distance. She's standing right in front of him and he's like staring into space as if he doesn't see her.
Yeah.
I think they wanted him to seem as creepy as possible.
It's so weird. They couldn't give him like something to hold, like something to look at.
You could open the door for them or something.
Like those 4 women were all like looking at the same screen, bent over. Yeah.
They enter the Prime Minister's office and Pulaski gets right to the point. She's like, is your entire population made up of clones?
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 Clones.
Clones.
Is your entire population made up of clones, Prime Minister?
Clones. Clones? Clones.
So Wilson is requested an urgent meeting and says that the people of Mariposa need help. That when the ship landed on the planet, the hull was breached and only 5 of them survived and they didn't want to give up. And they were scientists. So of course, scientists turned to cloning. Right, Jake?
Yeah, I love how scientists are like, were they physicists? Were they chemists? Were they geneticists? Were like, what's a scientist?
They're scientists.
So they can do all the sciences. If they had needed to build a nuclear rocket, they could have done that too.
For sure that if they did a flashback with this, they would definitely have been wearing lab coats.
Yeah.
On their spaceship,
They turned to clone. I mean, it is true that 2 women and 3 men is not a sufficient gene pool to build a society. It's absolutely the case that you can't like.
Can you explain why is that worse than cloning?
So there's a phenomenon called inbreeding depression. Basically,
sounds terrible. It makes you really sad.
It does. So it depresses your fitness, your biological fitness. So basically, the idea is that in any population there will be genes, there'll be copies of genes or versions of genes that are deleterious in some way, that are recessive. So you might be carrying one and not know it because you have a dominant version that isn't broken or isn't deleterious.
Deleterious is like not good, right?
Not good, yeah. When you have people with the same parents and grandparents interbreeding, what that does is it increases the chances of 2 of those recessive, like 2 copies of that recessive version meeting each other and being the only 2 copies in someone's offspring.
Ah.
When you're breeding with a bigger genetic diversity, that still happens sometimes, but it's less likely to happen over and over and over. So you end up with any recessive genes that are harmful, you end up with a higher proportion of the population has two versions of them, which means A, that they have whatever illness that gene causes, but also their children will necessarily carry the gene because it's the only thing they can pass on. And you do see this in sort of closed populations, religious groups, or just like small island populations where like everyone who lives there has cleft palate or club feet or is more prone to some kind of cancer or whatever. When you're cloning, everyone has the exact same genetic makeup as their parents, so you're not sort of concentrating the harmful genes in offspring.
Cool. So what you're saying is that the story of Genesis probably wouldn't have worked out right.
No. No, you need more than two people. Well, so it depends. Actually, I take that back.
Okay.
It could have happened.
No. I'm gonna say this. If Adam and Eve were perfect, if they had no deleterious alleles, no harmful versions of their genes, then there would be nothing to pass on to their offspring that would be harmful.
Fascinating. Well, we will get an Eve reference later on, so
Would be low genetic diversity, but it wouldn't necessarily lead to inbreeding depression.
Gotcha.
All right.
So the problem that Wilson has is that, like, I don't know, back in the day, because we're all old enough to remember this, you might have made lots of copies of the same VHS tape over and over.
Oh, yeah.
And when you do that, it starts to fade. Like the picture the color goes away, and it just doesn't look any good. And that's kind of what's happening. So they have replicative fading. So every time they're cloning, you're making a copy of a copy, just like those old VHS tapes. And eventually you have a non-viable VHS tape.
So I had never heard the term replicative fading in a biological context. So I Googled this.
Oh, is it real?
No, every single hit was a reference to this episode.
Yeah.
Except one hit, which was a reference to Aldous Huxley's Brave New World.
Oh.
Which is apparently the origin of the term. I don't even remember there being cloning in Brave New World, but I did read it like 20 years ago, so I don't know.
Fascinating.
But
I like that because in the last episode we were going on about the heterocyclic declination, which is apparently a medical thing that comes from Star Trek, and now we've got replicative fading, which is not necessarily from Star Trek, but all of the hits lead you to this episode.
Some kind of science fiction.
No, there's no, like, there are things you could think of, like Muller's ratchet or telomeres shortening. Like there's things you could think of that it might refer to, but it's, as far as I can tell, it's not a thing.
So what they want is an infusion of fresh DNA.
These VHS cassettes are worn out. They need some new film.
They need some new film. And Riker's like, you cannot take my film. And this is
Riker
interesting.
Is so mad.
He's so mad. And he's also like, I would say he's rude. Like, he's not.
Yeah.
You can say, no, you can't do that to me without being like, that's terrible. I can't even believe you would ask me that.
Yeah.
Right? Like, what they're asking for, at first at least, is for consent to do this. And, you can ask for things and people can say no to them. That doesn't end up happening here. But, like, this is part of what bugs me about this episode, in addition to everything else we've already talked about. But, like, they talk about how that's, like, Riker's like, well, one William Riker is unique, but if you have 100, then it's no longer unique. And he's talking to someone of whom there are presumably hundreds. And then also, Pulaski says no, Picard says no, and they don't ask anyone else.
That's right, yeah.
Like the
They're not even
from, can I please do this, to I have to take this by force, is just so broad that I can't even think of it. I can't even consider the ethical implications in either direction seriously, because there are so many other options.
Picard, Pulaski, and Riker are all so shocked. Like, it's like they see the fact that this is a society of clones as a moral failing of that society. And they're so, like, maybe they were driven to it by necessity, but they still think it's a moral failing. They're so shocked that they're unwilling to even ask anyone else on the Enterprise, what I think is interesting about this is that I think it is in some way reflective of popular attitudes about cloning. I was too young when this episode came out, but certainly in the 90s, when Dolly the sheep was cloned, it was a big deal biologically and scientifically. It was big news, but it was also like an enormous ethical controversy.
Yeah.
And I think there are certainly, like, when it comes to human cloning, important ethical questions to ask around like eugenics and reproductive rights and whatever. I think it's a complicated ethical question, but just the fact of cloning, period, was viewed with a lot of suspicion in the 80s and 90s in a way that I think may have changed since then. So the attitudes that we see in this episode are maybe more shocking to us now than they would have been to an audience when this aired.
You think the audience might have been kind of on their side with this?
Like maybe more so. It's baffling to me why they wouldn't be willing to share their genetic material, or at least ask if anyone else is.
To your point, Ruthie, I was going to say it's interesting too. I didn't think about it in terms of the questioning. Like they're so repulsed by the question, which is interesting because it's one of the few points in this episode where consent actually is taken into account, and they ask something before making a decision on behalf of an entire society. And Riker's still that upset. I also laughed at Riker's position about how it's important that there's only one Riker in the universe because that's going to come back to bite him in the butt later on.
Yes, I really liked that. Oh, if only you knew Will Riker.
Oh, you knew Will Riker. It's not going to age so well.
I also felt that there should have, like, there are other options, even if they, like, if what they do, what they're used to doing is cloning, but maybe someone would be willing to offer some genetic material to, like, reproduce with someone else's genetic material.
Yeah, like sperm and egg donations are options here that nobody brings up at any time.
And this existed in the 80s and 90s, right? Like that was a thing that people was IVF. I don't know, when did that start being a thing? I
think IVF existed. I mean, certainly sperm donation has existed. Let me look up the history of IVF here.
Why does it have to just be cloning?
IVF was invented in like so in 1978, the first baby. So not that long before, like just like less than a
10
decade
years
before this episode aired. But IVF had existed for a decade, and you don't need IVF to make babies. Like there are people with uteruses. Right?
Yeah, but it sounds like that's not an option here.
It's not a thing. Well, it's not an option now. That's gonna anyway. We'll get there. But it's but the fact that nobody has been like, we make sperm, we make eggs, we could give you those,
It's
there's even like they're talking about how technologically advanced that society is, and one of the other things I'm thinking of is I'm just checking this out right now. Some of the earliest research even into artificial wombs was being done back in the 1960s, so that would have been another concept. If they're so, because they seem to be very turned off on anything to do with the actual biological nature of reproduction outside of like cloning, and clearly they already have some kind of exo-wombish type technology, because as we're about to see, so that'd be something else as well. I wonder if it's like Jake, you're talking about how it might be baked into the culture at the time of the episode, but I also wonder if it's kind of baked into the culture of the Federation, because we see the Federation has like a real kind of aversion to genetic anything as a result of the wars, and so maybe that's some of the bias is being betrayed here by at least the human characters on board. But there may have been aliens that were totally willing to give their genetic material, and maybe they don't want that. Maybe they want a pure human society. I don't know.
But I think if that was the source of their objection, they would have stuff to say about the eugenicsy stuff that happens later. Like we'll get to it, but like nobody comments on any of the like deeply troubling stuff that happens later on. But anyway, I think that this irrational, in my opinion, aversion to being cloned exists, and this unwillingness to consider other options exists purely to bring us to the next event in the episode.
Yeah, I totally agree. Wilson says, okay, well, if you're not going to give us genetic material, can you at least help us repair some equipment? And Pulaski is like, can I also go down to study you? I'm not going to help you, but can I at least study you? Which feels a little rude. And she's like, I can't help you because I don't know anything about replicative fading, and also fixing your equipment also won't help you very much. But anyway, that's what they do. Yeah. So down on Mariposa, Riker and Pulaski both enter Wilson's office, and they say the repairs are almost complete. And then he gives a signal with his hands.
I just want to point out that the people who are, so they enter his office, and there are some people standing in the office, and it's that same man who was standing staring into space earlier, now standing staring into space in his office.
Yeah.
I also want to point out this is the one black person on this colony.
The
one black person, all he gets to do is stand and stare.
And they don't give him, not only do they not give him anything to do, they don't give him a single facial expression. Like, his job is to just stand and be blank. It's so weird and so unnecessary.
So strange.
Yeah, that portrays the clones in and of themselves in not a great light, because I mean, I presume that you could have an entire society of clones and people could still be regarded as individuals and still have their own personality, but that's not how they portrayed this particular individual.
I did get the impression, kind of, that the Grangers are all like high up government officials. So we got the Prime Minister and the Minister of Health. These the women that we see, they all seem to be like science-y people. They do stuff on computers. This guy, I don't know, like security, I'm not sure. You know, like it's like you have the job of your type. Yeah. I don't know. It's a bit weird. Ideal. Anyway, so as soon as Wilson gives this hand signal, someone shoots Riker and Pulaski and drags them off into a lab. And then LaForge enters and he's like, hey, I'm just looking for Riker and Pulaski. And Wilson says he hasn't seen them. So clearly something is up.
In the next scene, Pulaski and Riker are lying on tables in the lab. Their eyes are open despite the fact that they're clearly unconscious.
Yeah.
The doctors are sticking what seem to be biopsy needles into their abdomens through their clothes, which is just really weird. Again, like, why would you do it that way?
It is weird. I don't know why I don't find the hypo sprays through the clothes to be weird, but I really found this through the clothes to be strange.
Well, the hypo sprays, I feel like a lot of time, like, they're just getting a quick shot in their shoulder. They're wearing long sleeve shirts. It would be a pain to, like...
It's like an EpiPen or something. You just gotta get it in as fast as possible.
But this is like, they're unconscious. They are completely at these people's mercy. They didn't, like, pull up their shirts.
Nah, because they're wearing onesies.
They're wearing onesies, yeah.
They're wearing onesies.
Like, still. Hopefully we don't get any threads in with our genetic material that we're stealing.
What a weird choice. And given how much of Brenna's midriff we saw earlier.
Fair enough. That is true. But now we're back at the Enterprise, and LaForge enters looking for... Or LaForge had been trying to find them earlier, right? So he enters now the sick bay, and Pulaski and Riker are there, and he's like, what happened to you two? And they don't have any memory of any missing time, but they start thinking through the events, and they realize they can't remember what happened to them after they entered the office. And so Pulaski starts scanning them, and she's like, we're missing epithelial cells, and that the cells lining the stomach are the best choice for cloning. Is that the case?
So there's some truth to that. So epithelial cells are fully differentiated cells. They're not different from other cells for cloning, but I was actually looking into, like, what cells do we use for various things, including stem cell stuff, which is one of the technologies that's used for cloning. In the epithelium, there is what are called basal cells, which are the cells from which new epithelial cells grow, because your epithelium is on the surface of your skin or the inside of your intestines. So you're constantly shedding those cells. So you need a constant source of new ones. So the basal cells are stem cells in the epithelium. So they're less differentiated. It's easier to turn them into even less differentiated cells, ultimately to turn them into
like full,
like something that can be any cell.
Awesome.
What's called a pluripotent stem cell, which is a stem cell that can turn into any kind of cell. We'll get into how the cloning works in a second because it's nonsense in this episode. But it looks like they did, in fact, get at least that a little bit right.
So one thing I would just like to point out here, though, is that you would think that they would want to get samples from as many people as possible, right? To have not just to have two more samples isn't necessarily going to be that much more helpful. It's interesting to me that they didn't take any cells from LaForge, and it feels like a kind of perhaps unconscious on the part of the writers, but like ableist thing that like they're not taking LaForge. They're not taking LaForge's cells because then that would give them blind people. I don't know
it's
if that's
consistent with the weird eugenics that comes later as well.
It is absolutely
just like they want to have like high quality humans only, which again, but they don't do any genetic recombination with their existing population. They're just going to make more Rikers and more Pulaskis. It's just it makes no sense. Yeah,
it's very strange.
I'm also just wondering for optics if they're like, we can't have a consecutive episode where something else happens to Geordi right after what happened over the previous episode.
Fair enough. So they go down to the lab, Riker, Pulaski, and LaForge. They beam down and they find their fully adult clones growing. So is this a society that never has children? Is that what we are to take from this?
It makes no sense. This is not how cloning works. You need a blastocyst and an embryo and a fetus and a baby and an 8-year-old and a teenager to get an adult. You need all those stages.
This definitely colored my understanding of cloning because I for a long time, because I think, I saw this episode when I was quite young, and then I didn't really engage with the topic of cloning until I think I was like a teenager. And I really thought that a clone was just a photocopy of a person. Like it's just you had one person and now you have two.
A lot of sci-fi does that way too.
Yeah, it was very, very common.
Yeah, so this is going to be someone that is Pulaski's age and someone that is Riker's age, just like sprung from this incubator.
And they vaporize them. And I don't know how to feel about that.
It's interesting. I feel like it's so weird because it betrays so much about the attitudes that existed at the time this episode was written. Because can you imagine an episode of Star Trek where someone has an abortion?
Well, okay. Can I say something about that? Because apparently the writer of this episode, Melinda M. Snodgrass, got a lot of hate from anti-choice activists who, when Riker says we have a right to determine what happens to our own bodies, that made people angry. She meant it as a pro-choice kind of thing. Like that was her way of putting pro-choice stuff in. And I mean, like I said, things get changed after they get written. I don't think this is exactly as she wrote it, but a lot of people were upset that a character would say that they should have a right to determine what happens to their own bodies.
That's interesting.
And the material of their bodies.
I wonder if that's why the clones are adult. If they felt like it would be less likely to sort of trigger the knee-jerk response to the idea of abortion. If they're killing underdeveloped humans that are shaped like adults rather than shaped like fetuses or babies. If there was if that was an intentional choice to like stop their studio from getting bombed.
Yeah, like their skin isn't fully formed so you can like see through it. And I honestly, I still have a hard time telling like which one's Riker and which one's Pulaski. Like they look
the same to me.
I was almost like, they better make sure they're killing the right ones. These could be like other like from the original clones, but
Riker's clone should have had a beard.
Through his like translucent skin. It's just got these
beard growing.
He's like, that's my primary. That's my distinguishing feature. That's what makes me unique.
So how do we feel about this? Like, do we feel that they had a right to do what they did?
Who are you asking about? Are you asking about the Mariposans had a right or the...
No, but like to the crew to come down and vaporize their growing clones?
I think it's complicated. I mean, the clones I think are depicted as not yet people, which I think is important to the question.
Yeah.
And certainly the way in which the genetic material was harvested was not acceptable.
Yeah.
But I don't, and I think I'm in a minority of people here broadly. I think that independent of the question of like Riker and Pulaski's bodily autonomy with respect to their epithelial cells, I don't actually think that we have a right to control our genetic material. Like, I don't think that these clones belong to Pulaski and Riker anymore.
So Jake, just to like clarify, like if there was a way of cloning people through like you know, like if I could take a hair from, you know, that you shed and left on a chair near me, and someone decided to clone you using that.
As long as they don't expect me to parent that child,
right.
I don't think of that as a violation.
Yeah.
But I know that I am very much in the minority, and every friend that I have talked to about this feels like that would be a violation, and they do have a right to like, I understand that my feelings about this are not common, but I don't have an attachment to my genetic material.
Yeah. I really have a hard time with this because I kind of see what you're saying. Like it's your genetic material ceases to be yours once it leaves your body. If that makes sense, right? Like that's kind of how I also agree with what kind of Troy points out later, which is that these people are desperate and they're just looking for a way to survive.
Yep.
It just bugs me so much that this episode treats it as though this was their only option, because it absolutely shouldn't have been. And I would say, like, if anyone is in the wrong there, it's the Enterprise crew for not offering other options.
For not being willing to have the least conversation about how to solve this problem.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I that's where I kind of get tripped up. I don't know if I think Riker and Pulaski had a right to just stop these clones from becoming people. I'm a squarely at I don't know.
What do you think, Matthew?
I hadn't thought about what their stage of development is. So because they're growing as adults, I'm like, do they have the memories? Because sometimes like they wouldn't, but sometimes clones, like when they make them, they are like, they have memories and stuff. But if they're not children, like if we're not raising children, then are they just like childlike adults for a while? We don't go into all that. So I don't know. So some of those things that would need context in order to know. Jake, I'm interested by your position that you don't feel that you have control over your genetic material. So then I'm thinking, do I feel that way? Part of me does, because I would like to know that if someone created another version of me, I feel like I should have right over that. But then I don't know if I can argue that position. I think in this case, because it was like an assault on my body to make that happen, then in this particular case, I would say, well, yeah, like I feel like I have some say in what's going on with this particular person. But if it were outside of that, like if someone had found my genetic material somewhere and then had created another version of me somewhere, I feel like we should have some conversation over why people are able to do that as well. So it's hard to say. I understand that they're in a state of desperation. I think what I do appreciate about this is that after this happens, the crew, like Picard and the leadership, are at least empathetic enough to not just then abandon them wholeheartedly, because I think they had the right to at that point. They've like abducted members of the crew, but they're like, listen, we get that you're in this state of like survival mode and you're desperate, so maybe we can at least come up with another way to fix this. And at least that I appreciate. Like they kind of let all the other moral quandary of it sit, but at least they're like, oh, let's put that aside for a second, because we'll still try to help you.
It's interesting to me that Troy is the only one who's like, look, guys, just because you think it's weird doesn't mean it's wrong.
Yeah. And I kind of love Troy. She gets to say, I think, a total of 3 things in this episode, and they're all very important. The first thing she says is you can't just beam the Bring Lloydie up onto the Enterprise because they're going to think they were abducted by aliens. Then she says, there's something fishy going on down there. Be careful. And then she says this last thing, which I think is probably the wisest out of those 3 wise things, which, and she's absolutely right. Like she says, would we do any less if we were in that kind of position? One thing that Pulaski says, though, is like, this is not a solution. She says, like, this will give you another 15 generations, but it's still, you're still going to have this same problem. You're just kind of kicking it down the road.
Right.
So then Pulaski says the line that makes me throw up in my mouth, where she's like, cloning isn't the answer. What they need is breeding stock.
Yeah, when you start referring to people as stock, you know, you need to reevaluate
human beings.
Yeah.
Like,
no.
And it really, I think, is this, it participates in this intensely like colonial, and this I think is part of why Colm Meaney was right to find this episode objectionable. It's not just that it sort of portrays Irish people as stupid and alcoholic and so forth, but also that like this attitude of like there are some kinds of people, and some kinds of people are good for being smart, and other kinds of people are good for making babies and doing physical labor, right? Like that is really activated by this line of Pulaski's and the conversation that follows in a way that is totally unaddressed by the episode and any of the actors or any of the characters in it. Like they just say that and just leave it there. Like these people are
breeding stock,
are cattle, basically.
Yeah.
It also, like, not to get too in the weeds of current events, because sometimes it's just so upsetting, but it is like that's an argument that has been made in favor of restricting access to abortion, is like, oh, but then we have all these wonderful children for white people to adopt. Like it's kind, like it's a very and it's the same thing that who does not either have the means or the desire to take care of a child, basically it turns them into breeding stock. They will create children for other people.
And then like it goes on where Troy says that the Bringloidi have the energy and the drive and the clones possess, she says, emotional maturity.
I don't buy that. I don't buy that.
No emotional maturity from these clones.
Yeah, okay, so she doesn't just say those three wise things, she does say a fairly unwise thing as well.
But it's still like it's in that same, like, there are two kinds of people. There are people who matter and there are people who do work.
It's very icky.
Yeah, and to make that decision on behalf of everybody.
Yeah. Like they don't poll the Bringloidi or the Mariposans for that matter to find out if this is a thing they want.
Yeah.
Well, and so we end up in the observation lounge and they're meeting, and it's Picard and Pulaski with Wilson Granger and Danilo O'Dell. Wilson is like, no way. These people are primitive, hostile, disruptive. And Danilo's like, don't do me any favors.
Yeah.
Fine. He's like, it's just, and I mean, I'm totally on, of course, like on the Bringloidi side in this.
Bringloidi don't need the Mariposans, right? Like the Enterprise can drop them off anywhere. They've got functioning society. The only reason they had to leave was because their sun was going to explode. Like they're fine, actually, without the Mariposans. They are the ones doing the Mariposans a favor. Totally.
Although it also seems like they're doing the Enterprise a favor because the Enterprise doesn't seem to want to have to look for a... Like, this is also a thing. It just doesn't... None of this squares with what we know of these characters and the Federation and Starfleet, that like, oh, this will make our lives easier because we can just drop them off here instead of taking them to a starbase.
It feels like the writers wanted to set up a like humorous odd couple contrast between the like goats and hay and the computers and clones, and just gave no thought to any of the social implications of what they're saying with this episode.
And it's interesting to have such a conversation or discussion around like consent and choice on an individual level, but not on a societal level. And that contrast is not obvious to the writers or to how they structured the plot.
Like they're like Danilo and Wilson Granger are going to make this decision on behalf of their whole populations.
And let's be really clear about what this decision is, because eventually when Wilson comes around to it, Pulaski says that the Bringloidi are going to have to change their society, because at first, like, one of the problems that Wilson has is that he and his people are going to have to sexually reproduce with the Bringloidi, and that is something that they got rid of in their culture, and so at this point it's just repulsive to them. Danilo was like, oh, it's not too hard. You just put two people together and let it happen. But then Pulaski says, well, you'll have to change too, because monogamous marriage will not be possible. We have to broaden this genetic base. So each woman will have to have at least 3 children with at least 3 different men.
So she doesn't, I paid attention to this because I wondered, she doesn't say has to. She says ideally each woman will have 3 children by 3 different men.
That's still weird to me.
It is. And it is very much treating women like incubators and treating everyone like livestock.
Yeah.
But I did pay attention to whether she said have to, and she at least
Okay.
doesn't do that.
All right, fair enough. But still, it's weird.
They gloss over the like, our society has eliminated sex and sexual reproduction so quickly. The idea of it is repulsive to every single person in that society, and they're like, I'm sure you'll get over it.
Yeah.
Also, considering like how carefully they tread around non-interference and prime directive considerations when other societies, even when they are human, that in this case they're like, whatever, just like basically destroy the fabric of two different societies because we got to save one of them. I guess these decisions are just going to be made by a couple leaders, and then we go to town. We don't even bring up the prime directive.
Yeah. There's a part where Picard points out that it is because Wilson's like, these people are so different from us, and Picard points out that differences make people strong, and it feels like he's talking about genetic diversity there. He's kind of like, and you need that difference. Your society has not had that difference. But it's also true that this, like the cultural differences make people, make societies, I think, much stronger. That particular point that Picard makes, I think, would land a lot better in a different episode.
Yes. So I can see what they're trying to do, but
I can't give him too much credit after everything else that's happened in this episode.
Yes.
It's also like the biologist in me just can't stop thinking about the like logistics of this, because there's 223 Bringloidi, right? Which is enough people for a like genetically functional population, but barely. Okay. And then there's, when they talk about the Mariposan population, at one point they say something about cities, right? So we're talking tens of thousands of people minimum, right? If there are cities, multiple cities on this planet, probably more like hundreds of thousands or millions of people that have a genetic, like, effective population size of 5, right? There's 5 human genomes and there's 223 people in the Bringloidi. Like, what?
Yeah.
Is the plan here exactly?
It'd be like a Trill situation. Who gets to be joined and who doesn't?
Yeah.
I mean, from a genetic point of view, it doesn't matter because they're clones. So I guess like find 600 of your millions of people who don't mind having sex, and then they're the ones. But like, it's just there's some serious fridge logic in this episode.
Yeah. We get this nice moment where Danilo spits on his hand to shake Wilson's. Didn't mind that. Wilson takes it.
He takes it, and I think what they're trying to symbolize here is that like your society is going to be swapping fluids now, so get used to this. Let's shake on it.
So we go back to Cargo Bay 7. Danilo finds Brenna and tells her what's going on, while Wilson kind of looks around. He sees this pregnant woman holding a goat, and he seems fascinated by both. I guess he wouldn't have ever seen a pregnant person or perhaps an animal before.
This is the thing, is he's like baffled by everything. And like, do the Mariposans not have agriculture? Where does their food come from? Like,
they clone it.
What is happening here?
Yeah, there are actually some pretty sinister implications going on over there.
How do they have cities, but they don't have crops?
They don't have hay. They don't have spinning wheels.
You can't actually have cities without also having farms.
Unless they also have replicators. We don't know how their
maybe
society
they did.
works.
Maybe they had replicators.
Yeah, maybe they have replicators. I don't know how did they have replicators in the 22nd century?
Oh, probably not. Maybe they developed them by now though. If they're like
scientists, remember?
They're scientists. Yeah. There's someone in lab coats making food somewhere. But Brenda starts yelling, and she says about the that men make grandiose decisions but never stop to consider how they will affect the women or anybody, which I think
she's not wrong.
She's not wrong, right? Like this is what's happened through this whole episode. And so I reminiscent, since there's obviously themes here around abortion, choice. Yeah. And I've seen several times images posted of legislatures that are making these kinds of decisions that are entirely rooms of men.
Yep.
And we've seen that happening here as well.
Yes.
And she says, like, she's not sure if this is what she wants. And Picard says, well, he's not going to make her. She can stay on the Enterprise. But, like, what a choice.
Yeah,
right?
Leave your entire society or
Or 3 husbands.
3 husbands.
But then she's like, well, he seems like a fancy husband.
Yeah, well, she got over that really fast. Like, listen, we need to end the episode in 2 minutes, okay?
Yeah, basically.
This is my pet theory. I remember I said put a pin in her and Riker, her sort of aggressively seducing Riker.
Yeah.
Is my pet theory is that whole business with Riker is to establish that she's a slut early on so that the audience will swallow this ending.
Oh God.
Yeah.
I one thing I was thinking of that business with Riker is maybe his genetic material is going to end up on that planet.
Oh, that's going to come up in season 4 of Picard. That's what that's going to be.
Oh, I feel like I don't know. I feel like Riker.
You think
Riker spreads enough of his seed around, pardon the expression, that like surely he's got his reproductive business on lock.
When you look up cosmic panspermia in the dictionary, guess what there's a picture of?
It's Riker.
It's Riker.
That's a very good joke, Matthew.
I don't like this, but I also do that she approaches Wilson and the camera cuts away just as she's lifting up her skirt to show off her feet again.
I didn't notice that.
This is clearly the bring Lloydie way of flirting, is to talk about your
It's
dirty
really
feet.
funny.
Man, if Riker didn't pick up on those cues, I've got news for you when it comes to Wilson.
He's gonna be like, no, here's the bucket, here's the sponge, here's the soap.
Yep.
He's like, we don't have showers with water in our society because we're scientists.
We're scientists. Yeah, we're above that.
Yeah.
The end.
Well, there we go. That's the episode.
We started at the head and worked our way down.
Oof. Gross.
So the title of the episode is Up the Long Ladder, which Jake pointed out to me. This didn't register to me at all, that it is like a DNA kind of joke.
That's how I read it.
But it's also,
yeah, of course, yeah.
There is also an Irish like nursery rhyme type thing. And I did some digging around this, and I can't fully tell if this is specific to one nursery rhyme or if it gets kind of tacked on to other nursery, like a bunch of Irish nursery rhyme. The one I found was called Are You Ready for a War? And it's like a song that has a tune similar to, but not entirely like London Bridge is Falling Down. And it has stuff between like the English soldiers and the Irish soldiers. The ending of it takes a totally different rhythm, and it goes up the long ladder and down the short rope, to hell with King Billy and God bless the Pope. If that doesn't do it, we'll tear him in two and send him to hell with his red, white, and blue.
Huh.
So it's an anti-English.
You don't say.
So yeah, that's also where the title comes from. I don't see that one fitting.
I did notice, I don't know if there's any significance to this. I mean, Patrick Stewart has been playing, was cast as Picard presumably long before this episode was written. I did sort of notice when they first beamed them up and Danilo O'Dell was like, making decisions without so much as by your leave, and then Picard opens his mouth and an English accent comes out. I stand by my position that this is a bad idea, poorly executed, and I love it. I love this episode.
I think there's good stuff in here to talk about. Like, honestly, like once we get into the meat of it, there's like, okay, there's a lot of interesting implications here, but it's couched in such an odd episode.
I just think it's a shame that the episode doesn't engage in any of those conversations.
I know,
right?
I know.
I feel though like that's what we've kind of realized in recording the podcast, that we always have the longest conversations about the episodes that engage the least with their material.
Yeah, because we got to do it on their behalf. Like, here's what we should talk about in this episode.
Yeah. Any final thoughts before we close out?
Humans are not breeding stock. Don't refer to them that way.
Yeah, that's a good point. Humans are not. Yeah, when you're calling people breeding stock,
you have gone wrong.
Take a step back and
take a step back.
All right. Well, I think we did it. I think we made it all the way through. Thanks so much for this science help, Jake. That was
Thanks for having me.
Very helpful. Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of With the First Link. If you liked what you heard, please feel free to leave us a 5-star rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast provider of choice.
Our cover art was created by Nathan Nunn, and you can find more of his work at nathannunn.ca. Our theme song is An Amazing Adventure by Flame Lion Studio. You can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at FirstLinkPod, or send us an email at firstlinkpod@gmail.com to tell us all about your feelings about your own genetic material. I'm Ruthie.
I'm Jake.
And I'm Matthew.
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 And I'm Matthew.